I manage the partner sales for Nuaware across EMEA and Asia Pacific. I work for a company called Nuaware. We are a cloud native specialist distribution company. And we've been in the space for almost 7 years now. Today's session is to introduce one of our new vendor partners, Apiiro, who, as you see on the screen, play in the space of cloud native application security. So before I move on, I would just like to give you a context about who Nuaware is, what our journey has been, and sort of give you a gist of our portfolio. So if you're a partner or a customer, you will understand exactly what you can achieve out of collaboration with Nuaware. So as a quick intro, we are a company with over 1,000 enterprise customers across the world. 2 years ago, we were acquired by a company called Exclusive Networks. And that led to our expansion in different parts of the world. We are pretty much present everywhere across the North America, South America, Europe, and Asia Pacific. We started our journey specifically around cloud native products only. Initially, we played the role of being a consultant, a technology provider for a lot of customers in the space. But then we graduated into becoming a cloud native technology distribution company. And in the subsequent slides, you will see what kind of technologies we have distributed over a period of time and how our portfolio stands today. From a journey perspective, I think this is the best way to illustrate what our overall capabilities are and our portfolio looks like. And it resonates with how customer adoption path stands in cloud native, right? So the first bit was when we started off with cloud native infrastructure. So early days, a lot of people were looking to move to the cloud, looking to adopt best practices in DevOps in general, looking to modernize their legacy applications and the way they run their infrastructure in general, an adoption of mainstream Kubernetes and public and private cloud. This is where our original motion started. This eventually led us to focus on the second pillar of our portfolio, which is essentially security, which is also where Apiiro come in. So more on that in a bit. With respect to cloud native security, very soon customers realized that obviously everybody had to look at security very differently. It's not the same as it used to be in the legacy world, where you set up firewalls or endpoints and network level security, and you're able to do it. So there was this need to implement the shift left approach. Obviously, zero trust was a big thing that people advocated when cloud native security became mainstream. And then obviously, there were a lot of different categories of vulnerabilities that were identified over a period of time in cloud native, which essentially needed securing in different bits and pieces, right? So no such one solution which can handle everything. Hence, we had to partner and collaborate with a lot of providers. So that's something that you will see in the subsequent slides as well. And sort of now what we see is the third pillar coming in, which is essentially taking the whole practice to making it resilient in general. So this title of SREs has become ingrained into the DevOps and DevSecOps world now. They sort of sit between both those teams and make sure that their infrastructure, their overall visibility is extremely on point and reliable from an engineering standpoint. And that's where we partner with a few solutions which enable these use cases for customers as well. So all in all, this was the journey that we took from a company perspective. And now I will touch on a little bit on the technologies that we distribute individually within these pillars. So the first one is cloud native infrastructure. Our early days, we all started with containers and Kubernetes and Docker. First, while it only used to be called Docker, now we have two companies in the Docker or container space. One was called formerly as Docker Enterprise. It's now taken over by Mirantis as a company. So the infrastructure side of Docker belongs to Mirantis, and the desktop side for business belongs to Docker still, right? So these are the two mainstream container technologies that we distributed. And we continue to be the chosen value-added distributor for these two vendors as well. Once we got into this container space, very soon there was a demand from customers from the perspective of how can I, automate things? How can I do DevOps the right way and adopt, the best practices from that perspective? And that led to our partnership with HashiCorp. And one of the first products that we started to offer to market was Terraform. A lot of people know Terraform, but a lot of people might not know that it belongs to HashiCorp as a technology because it's very popular in the open source world. So we deal with the infrastructure as a code enterprise product, and there is a lot of things that it brings to the table, mainly catered towards trying to automate the whole infrastructure as code process. Also make sure that you're able to put in processes in place and basically control the way you monitor and govern your infrastructure to the tune of managing multiple cloud environments. A few other solutions from HashiCorp. Console for Service Discovery also does service mesh, network automation, and Nomad, which does Kubernetes orchestration. These were mainstream DevOps and sort of automation tools that people were very familiar with, but later on people started adopting the enterprise versions of this. And another product that we recently partnered with, it's called Launch Darkly. It's used for feature flag and toggle management. So essentially trying to release features of applications and automating that entire process of releases of new features without affecting production environment is what it stands for. So that's more or less on the cloud native infrastructure. Moving to the second piece, which is security. One product that we started off with was Vault. Essentially does secrets management and encryption on any Kubernetes environment. Again, very popular product. And we've seen inroads into a lot of customers as a result of the requirement that people have for managing secrets, passwords, API keys, tokens, or whatever kind of secrets they want to manage and centrally monitor, govern, etc. Then, we had obviously the need to secure the cloud itself. So we partnered with SysDig, which does cloud security posture management. And they also do container security or workload protection as well. So different kinds of clouds, combination of clouds, doesn't matter what kind of infrastructure you're using, you're able to do everything in the cloud native way. So this company is born in the cloud and they are able to secure environments natively from the cloud. Obviously, Apiiro, as the session is meant for today, I will not deep dive too much into this because I'll leave it to the guys to talk about it themselves. But cloud native application security and a couple of other products in the security space. We work with Salt for APIs, and then we work with Snyk for developer of code security as well. So this is the security landscape, and moving on to the last bit, which is essentially resilience. So for observability, we work with Grafana Enterprise, and for digital operations management or incident response, we work with PagerDuty. Goes without saying that this entire portfolio has evolved over time, and it continues to evolve almost on a quarterly basis. So we are seeing new technologies enter the frame almost every other week, and obviously people wanting to partner with us courtesy of our position in the market. We tend to partner with best in breed, right? So this is a summary of what I just explained to you, all the portfolio by use case. At any point, if you have any questions, please feel free to write it in the chat or the Q&A box that you see. Also, if you have any audio issues or something that you're not able to see clearly on presentations, please point that out as well. So moving on, a little bit on our capabilities for training. So we cover taster workshops for a lot of conceptual level training. So we do intro to containers, to Kubernetes. We've been doing this for ever since we started. So if you see the URL on the screen and you basically log on to that schedule, you'll be able to see all the upcoming sessions that we have lined up. All you need to do is just register for them, and you'll be able to get access to those sessions as and when they happen. And then we have the second module of training, which essentially is official vendor training, whether it's related to the vendors that I just presented, or even otherwise, sometimes depending on what requirements are from the customer. We do this for partners as well as we do it for customers. So no real specifics required for who can attend these trainings. And last but not the least, we are also a Kubernetes certified training company, right? So we do CKA, CKS trainings overall for Kubernetes. And we try and emphasize on some of the technologies while we explain the whole concept of Kubernetes security or Kubernetes administration, and explain how our portfolio links into, or how the key products link into the Kubernetes landscape. So it's sort of a practice come theory as well, as far as the overall training piece is concerned. So this is for our training. Quick snapshot of our overall customer list worldwide, right from UK all the way to Asia Pacific. And a lot of names you will see resonate with the modern day digital companies. So, whether you look at banking, fintech, even the modern day e-commerce giants, and, digital government companies, etc. You see most of the big names on the screen. At any given point, a lot of these companies bought more than one technology from us as a distribution company. So to summarize, why Nuaware? First, I covered the technology, the overall distribution landscape that we have for products and vendors. Secondly, our training capabilities. That's what really makes us unique in the space, because we have the skill sets to educate people in this domain. And last but not the least, we also have services to help partners implement the products that we offer. So depending on what technology we are talking about, different levels of services are available for implementation as well as training. That brings me to the end of my presentation. So I will stop sharing and I will hand it over to my friend Simon to take it over from here. Simon, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Pritesh. Appreciate it. Thank you for the introduction. Right, let me get into slide sharing mode. Great. So thanks again, Pritesh, and thanks to everybody who's joined the call today. We're incredibly excited about the partnership ahead with the folks at Nuaware, and look forward to many more conversations with obviously your partner community. My name's Simon. I'm leading the sales effort here for the EMEA region. I'm joined by my colleague Dan, who leads a sales engineering team globally here at Apiiro. We're going to run you through, I guess, a bit of background of sort of why Apiiro came about as a business, why we were set up, some of the problem space that we're out to solve, some of the challenges we're seeing in different customer organizations from the conversations we're having with the speed and the velocity of software development, and frankly, security teams are struggling to keep up with that velocity, right? So we're going to talk you through some of the trends we're seeing in the market today, and introduce you to Apiiro and how we're helping a number of different organizations solve those problems. I'm going to run a few slides, and I'm going to hand over to Adan, who's going to take you through a bit of a live demo of the platform to get you familiar with what the platform actually looks like. We've got a chat capability here, so if you want to pose any questions, we'll allow us, 10, 15 minutes or so at the end to answer any questions. So if you've got questions along the way, please do throw them into the chat, and we'll see if we can get to those one by one at the end. So I guess just to start with, I spoke about, release velocity. I spoke about the fact that, some of those security engineering teams are struggling to keep up with the velocity of change. As we look at how those methodologies have changed over the years, there was a move away from waterfall, which was typically less adaptive to change, lacking when it came to flexibility, and typically subject to very late feedback and testing as part of that process. And then a lot of agile development came along, right? So that helped organizations with, delivering product in a faster time to market, improving customer value, allowing sort of those frequent updates and flexibility, and those self-organized pods or teams, allowing them to sort of, make better use of resources that were available. And then, as we are in the world of cloud native development today, and DevOps as a methodology came about, bridging the gap between tools, processes, and capabilities. And cloud native today is all about speed and agility, frankly, right? So, and release velocity is faster than ever. And you consider organizations like Netflix with 600 plus services in production, deploying hundreds of times a day, Uber and WeChat with thousands of services in production, deploying, up to 1,000 times a day. Increasingly difficult for security teams to keep up with that velocity, that speed of development. And I guess you couple that with the fact that typically, from our conversations with various customers, this rings true, and often that ratio, by the way, is we've seen other ends of the scale, but typically one security architect supporting teams of 150 plus developers who are generating multiple changes per day. We're expecting typically a single architect to review hundreds of changes and decide which of those changes are risky is hugely challenging as a task for your typical AppSec practitioner. And typically those manual processes today are time consuming. Again, put a time lag or an overhead to those development processes. So considering things like risk assessments and threat modeling, knowing when and how you run a risk assessment, what warrants a threat model, is the app I'm developing sharing sensitive data, looking at processes like compliance and governance, considering things like PCI and GDPR, security reviews and pen tests, as an AppSec practitioner, having to spend time team by team, sitting down, reviewing code regularly, looking at scheduling a pen test without the context around, what significantly changed with an application and where to focus that testing. Generating software bill of materials, time spent in doing so, and helping protect against, software supply chain types of attacks. And you couple that with what we're finding today, some of those more legacy SAS, SCA capabilities, some of the more legacy tools. A common theme we hear from application security practitioners today is alert fatigue, right? Those tools are throwing up noisy, typically very noisy, throwing up heaps of false positives. How do you triage? How do you map actually what's potentially business impacting? How do you determine which vulnerability you should be fixing and when? You couple that with, at the same time, risks are on the rise, right? So we've seen a spike in the number of vulnerabilities disclosed. You've seen a huge spike in software supply chain attacks, many of which are making front page headlines. And you couple that with the fact that, the typical remediation time for an application vulnerability is over 50 days. You couple all of that with the fact that the market is increasingly crowded, right? There's a lot of vendors, increasing number of vendors popping into the application security space, and for an end customer, it's difficult to really make sense of a lot of overlapping technologies, and frankly, some of these technologies, some of the vendors you see there today, that's building on technology that's over 20 plus years old. We hear a lot about shift left, and Pritesh, you use the term, and I think frankly, as in terms of vendors in our space, we overuse that term, and some of the more experienced cybersecurity folks, when we say shift left, roll their eyes, and quite rightly so. So we're finding far too often organizations are simply shifting the problem left, right? So delivering legacy tooling that creates the same volume of noise at an earlier stage in development. You're asking developers to fix problems they frankly don't quite understand because they haven't got the context or the knowledge base to help them understand and make sense of the problem. So we also talk about the fact that risk is multidimensional, right? It's not a single alert. Okay, take this example here as this slide builds out. Now, this is a developer, consider a developer creating a user story that requires logic to collect new data, an internet-facing API that then adds PII in a high business impact application. The security expertise of that developer really does matter, right? And then you also can set same principle for pull request discussions, cloud infrastructure changes, authorization controls in an API gateway. These are all fundamentally critical pieces of information needed to help an AppSec practitioner and a developer needed to evaluate the risk of change. So Apiiro and how we can help with some of these challenges that are typical to enterprises, big and small, across different sectors. We talk about contextual risk-based AppSec. And what we mean by that is being able to answer questions like, how, as an organization, how do you know how many developers you have, what they're working on, what experience they have? Can you, as an organization, see how many applications you have and where they're deployed? Do you have enough application security resources to cover all of the risk assessments you need to perform? Can you prioritize and investigate risks across all of your AppSec tools and processes? And how can you enforce compliance at scale, for example? So these are all types of questions we help address, and I'll go through each of these one by one. But I guess to start with visibility, how we do what we do, and Dan's going to show you a demonstration in a moment, or show it live. But I guess fundamentally what we do as Apiiro, we start by connecting to your source control management platform or manager platforms, right? So as an organization who has quite a fragmented engineering domain, may have different SCMs, maybe through acquisition or mergers, we can connect to multiple source control managers, be it cloud or on-prem, and connect and give a holistic view on building out that end-to-end view on risk. So the secondary connection, we would connect into a ticketing system, and that's all we need to do in order to gain that full application inventory and start to answer some of those questions I posed earlier, building out that full view on what applications you have and where they're deployed, and start to build out that initial view on what your risk posture looks like. We can optionally connect in other application security testing tools, some of those more legacy SCA, SAS, DAST, etc., feeding those tools in, even including API gateways, etc., but feeding those tools in and giving more context around those findings, but we don't need to. But once Apiiro is connected, we're able to build out a full real-time application inventory and then start to break that down across risky components. And those components could be open source, infrastructure as code, starting to break it down across the developer's knowledge and potential business impact of what they're developing. So once you've got that view and that understanding of how many applications are under development, you can then start to break it down across who's developing, their knowledge, their level of expertise. And this type of information is there critical to better understand risk and development, and then help building out things like a good security champions program, for example. Once you've got that visibility, we're as Apiiro able to start to break it down across what we term attack surface elements, right? So those could be an example, an internet-facing API, PII being written into logs or into data models, exposed secrets or vulnerable software dependencies. But with this visibility, you can then start to ensure you've got a better understanding of risk and of the business impact of your applications, and then help you then prioritize and manage those risks right from the design phase through to production. And this risk-based work plan then helps you contextually assign the right AppSec tasks to the right people. And those people could be security champions, it could be a specific developer or a security engineer. But I guess the important point is the risk assessment part is that decisioning is completely automated, and there's less reliance on, as I put in an earlier slide, those manual processes, those risk assessment questionnaires that are often obviously time consuming and resource intensive. But then once with this in place, you can now start to automatically trigger the right process at the right time. And that could be a security code review, a compliance review, vulnerability remediation, or threat model. But those remediation tasks are fully automated. An example could be an API that's internet facing and exposes PII without proper authorization. You can then trigger a comment and a pull request and add a security champion, for example, as a reviewer. But the point is that Apiiro triggers an automated remediation workflow to address any new application risk as they're introduced. So I guess just the final sort of closing slide before we sort of hand over and take you through a bit of a demo. But uniquely with the Apiiro platform, we are absolutely about risk mitigation and helping organizations improve their risk posture, but at the same time maintaining the velocity of cloud development and ensuring the operational efficiency of the application security program, right? So we are helping organizations in what is quite testing times in terms of the macroeconomic factors that are out there. We're able to help deliver efficiencies across existing processes and tools, and also just maintain that velocity of development. I'll hand over to Adan, who's going to take you through a short demo. We'll take you through how simple it is to connect up Apiiro. We'll take you through how, in minutes to hours, what the type of visibility you and your end clients should expect through a connection, and start to show you how we can introduce some automation through some of the workflows that are typically associated. Please do pose any questions, and we'll leave a few minutes at the end to answer. Adan, the floor is yours, my friend.
Thank you. Thanks, Simon. Thanks, Pritesh. Let's start by sharing the screen. All right, cool. Perfect. All right, so I hope that everyone can see my screen. Great. So to get started with Apiiro, and this is, I think, something which is worth to know. So our application is SAS based. Of course, we have that flexibility of having like on-prem deployments or having like some hybrid deployments from that perspective. But once you have the app running, the integration is done solely with API keys. So you don't need to deploy anything or any components. So from that initial, from a maintenance point of view, the effort is very low. What we will do initially with any of our users, we will essentially hook into the source control manager or managers, which is a very valid use case for larger organizations who grow through M&As. So we will hook with a read-only permission to GitHub, GitLab, Azure DevOps, Bitbucket, Perforce, or others. We will hook into the ticketing system, and I will call out the use cases in a bit. And we will also hook into the communication system. So those would be the essentials in order to go and start to set up that layer or that foundation of risk visibility across the organization. I will also mention that we can also connect to additional tools that you might have in your SDLC. Those might be like third-party security tools that are already integrated, or those might be some other assets that related to your runtime environment. But once we've initiated the SCM integration, so what Apiiro will do behind the scenes, it will go and discover all the code repositories that you have in the organization. And for any of these code repositories, what Apiiro will actually do, it will start build a profile on any of them. And the way that it's being done is by analyzing all the code changes throughout the history. So we will actually analyze from the very first commit, we will analyze the code change, the commit message, the pull request discussion, the developer who is associated with that change, and we'll essentially build a comprehensive profile for any of the code repositories, but also for any of your developers. So that initial risk assessment that every practitioner usually does will be done automatically and continuously. To go to the details and probably to start to understand like how we can go and then consume that context into the prioritization process. So Apiiro will build that profile for any of the code repositories, being able to understand like what's the repo name, what is the default branch, what's the breakdown of programming languages, how many developers are working on that project, what's the overall risk level, whether there are any indications for high business impact factors on that repository, meaning that it include IDs or include usernames or passwords or that information, and attack surface summary, whether that repository holds APIs, does it have any sensitive data in it, does it implement authentication or authorization, or is it user facing? And that context by itself help you to distinguish about, okay, so out of my hundreds, thousands, or tens of thousands of repositories, which ones are the ones that I need to focus on my security efforts? So this is the first layer of prioritization. And the way that we are able to build that profile is done by, number one, building that up-to-date application inventory that discovers all the different application code components. So starting by the modules that you might have in the environment, build a complete API inventory directly from the code. So for instance, being able to understand like what is the route, what is the controller, whether this API is exposed via an ingress in Kubernetes, or whether out of my APIs, which ones are actually exposing sensitive data like PII or payment, PHI, or something else, which is of course another automatic detection, which is done by Apiiro. Aside from that, we also build a complete technologies list. So even if you have those compliance requirements that you need to demonstrate to your auditor what is being implemented in the context of that repository, you can get that information very easily. For example, what are the logging frameworks that are embedded within the application? What are the security controls that are embedded? What are the authorization, encryption, and of course, other technologies as well, like CI/CD, infrastructure as code, and so on and so forth. Aside from that, another use case which is very much valid and also is a sweet spot based on our understanding of the applications is the ability to generate an SBOM, a software bill of material, which is a growing initiative, especially when people are more care about securing the supply chain. So you're able to get that complete dependency store, understanding like what is the license which is associated with each dependency, what's the version, whether it is internet exposed, or whether there is only a single maintainer that works on that dependency, or whether it has no vulnerabilities, and so on and so forth. So just being able to enrich the data about every dependency within that bill of material. Aside from that, another thing that's worth calling out is that our ability to detect sensitive data, like PII and payment, as I explained before, where at the end of the day, this is done by analyzing the code and detect like all the data models that are in use within the code, and also being able to correlate those back to the flow of APIs, for instance, reflecting those to risk factors. So definitely you can have that visibility, so you can go and have like more matured conversations with architects, with engineering, when it comes about how data is being stored and processed, and so on and so forth. Aside from that, we also build like a complete secret store. So being able to detect like all the secret that you have in the environment, starting by type of the secret, of course, like whether this is like a patron key, like a key to AWS, to Google, something that goes to sensitive, that access to sensitive areas, which one is a random key, like just if you'd like, strings with some high level of entropy, or whether those are user passwords. Aside from that, we can also classify where that secret sits. Is it in the configuration file? Is it in the source code, test script, and so on and so forth? And of course, the exposure level, whether this is like exposed, is it encrypted properly? Is it just like a hashed? So being able to have that information, you can of course now attribute different types of risks and build your own policy based on that context that Apiiro filled in. Of course, Apiiro also like analyze infrastructure as code, build developer profiles, and we will cover those in a second. I will just put a pause and just say that from a coverage point of view, without having any third-party tool in your environment, Apiiro can actually detect, give you coverage around secrets, around OSS security and licenses, around API security, and infrastructure as code. And of course, the orchestration of the entire solution. Once we've built that, so now we can go and start to bake in that context into the prioritization process. So if, for instance, we are thinking about secrets risk or exposed secrets, so for any type of risk in Apiiro, I can go and bake that context. So for example, I can review only the secrets which are actually valid, meaning that if a developer put his hands on them, he can actually access to any of my sensitive area. And this is like a very useful prioritization rule to go and understand like where I should start my remediation from. Other thing that I could also do is just like go and say, I would like to focus only on the secret that exists in my high business impact applications. So being able to call those out and fix those immediately, or on the flip side, just go and ignore anything which exists in the test logic or bake in that context. For any type of risk with Apiiro, so maybe just go to one of them, there are a couple of things that we can understand relatively easily. So number one is the ability to understand where that secret sits, the classification, some highlights. So this is like, for example, sits in a test, it's a user password, it's exposed. So probably less interesting in the context of prioritization, but definitely for any type of risk, I can always understand like who is the developer or the main contributor of that particular asset. I can go and explore it in the code. I can dismiss it if it's not relevant by accepting or ignore that risk. And of course, I can also take an action by send a Slack notification or open a ticket in Jira or in Azure DevOps or any ticketing system that the organization use. So this is an example about secrets. The same, of course, apply for open source security or for API security. So for example, for the open source security, you can very easily try to filter out only the critical and highs that are, for instance, are deprecated and potentially like are also internet exposed. And by doing so, I can say, hey, this is like the current list that I need to go and fix now, because even if someone is going to find a problem there, no one is going to fix those dependencies. So within that context, I can understand like, okay, so what's the actual fix? What's the latest? If there is a latest version, and whether this is useful from that perspective. Cool. So just be also like cautious about time. So everything that we've seen so far in Apiiro was mainly about the current state, right? Like we plugged Apiiro, we actually build a profile for any of the repositories. We started to identify the top critical risks, and we can also actually go and build a plan for the remediation or remediating only the top critical assets. The next thing that's worth calling out is like, how can I embed those best security processes or practices within my development processes? So for that perspective, we've built a comprehensive workloads engine that can serve both DevSecOps practitioners, AppSec, or the developers themselves. And that can start with a very easy task by going through and setting a workflow that says that whenever a new repository is getting created, as a practitioner, I would like to get notification for that because I would like to go and write a design review with the owner or potentially plug it into additional security tools that I might have in the organization. So being able to get those upfront events over what's going on in engineering. Then we can also go and hook directly to the pull request and provide early feedback or invoke the right AppSec process upfront. For example, I can do things like if someone adds a secret or a password potentially in the code, I would like to get a notification for visibility, but I can also go and comment on the PR or potentially block that PR and provide that early feedback to developers before it gets to the next step in the pipeline. So this is one example. Another example would be, so Apiiro distinguish between a risky change and a vulnerability. So vulnerability might be things like exposed secrets, user password that are added to the code, or potentially APIs that are added with missing input validation. But on the flip side, just if someone added like a new API or a new sensitive data, or whatever, for whatever reason, someone decided to downgrade an external dependency, then commenting on the PR wouldn't necessarily make sense, but definitely assigning the relevant security architect, the team lead, someone who has that security awareness in his responsibilities would make more sense from that perspective. So being able to push those out and engage with development as early as they work on their code might help any organization to move faster and to ship the code in a better state from a security point of view. Yeah, and two more bits, and probably then it will make sense to take some questions if anyone in the team has. So first of all, is one thing that Apiiro can also help with is maintaining an up-to-date application inventory, or if you'd like, an application risk profile. So especially when organizations transition to the cloud, so usually they will work in a microservices architecture, meaning that the risk of an application component will sit in multiple different areas, in different security tools, in different repositories, different backlogs, and so on and so forth. So with Apiiro, you can actually build that aggregated application profile. So you can say things like, okay, so for my application, so these are the relevant repositories that assembles that application. This is the backlog where my developers maintain their tickets. I can capture insights like this is a microservice, which is deployed to the cloud, or is it's a hybrid. Who are the points of contact in terms of the security architect, the team lead, the champion, so on and so forth. I can capture things like what are the security compliance requirements that that particular application needs to meet, or some additional risk factors like how many users this application serves, or what's the estimated revenue, and so on and so forth, where all of these, in the end of the day, are risk factors that you can bake into the policy and into the prioritization process. And then once you have that layer, so number one, you can review at any point of time what is the actual risk in the application. So being able to see, okay, so I have a dashboard, but I can also see like a summary about what are the types of risks, how many of them are accepted, how many of them are ignored, what are the different sources. So also being able to integrate Apiiro to third-party tools, and being able to number one, see everything in a single view, but number two, being able to attribute every type of risk to the relevant code owner. And also being able to explore like more in details the actual risks, or see the risk in the pull request. So this layer is actually an enabler for a security champion program, because now you can make sure that that a global AppSec practitioner, as a security champion, you have like that common framework that you can collaborate and understand at any point of time what are the actual risks, being able to build that policy that will apply for all. Yeah, and that's it. I can also mention that we can integrate to, of course, to any organizational SSO, and we have additional types of integration that we can actually create and generate more context, like integrate to the runtime. But happy to drill down with any of you or any of your customers from that perspective. Cool. I'd like to thank you for the demo, and probably we will take some questions for the remaining few minutes.
Great, thanks, Adan. So some good questions that have come through. I've just started to answer some of them. Let's take them from the top, actually. So there was a question around from Chris. Hey there, Chris. How is Apiiro licensed? You'll see the answer there in the chat, but just to replay it, Apiiro is licensed per contributor, right? So typically that's a developer, but it's someone who who's made a commit or impacted potentially risk across the software development lifecycle in the last 90 days. So it could include a DevSecOps practitioner, a security architect, application security, but typically the bulk of the license count will be based on developers, and that will be licensed on an annual contract typically. There was also a question on, is there a partner portal or program? Yes, there is. I've shared a link in the chat. Let me just share my screen to give you all a view on what that link is as well, in case you can't see the chat. Let me just share the screen. There we go. So partners.apiiro.com. That will give you access to various sort of technical documents, co-marketing capabilities, training modules, etc. Heap of information there. You'll need to register, I believe, to log on. So if you want to, I guess, as a follow-up, if you're interested in getting access, please contact your Nuaware account manager as a first point of contact, and they'll help get you folks set up. There was another question actually around how we differentiate or between some of the more traditional application security tools like SAS or SCA. And I guess the one word to throw there, and I use this word a couple of times, but context, right? So a lot of those more traditional tools fundamentally lack context. They just look at things like, CVE scores to determine how important an alert is. They don't, for example, pinpoint who introduced that vulnerability and where that vulnerability sat. Is it sat in a test file or in production? And also, taking our approach is quite different, really, by, for us, taking a vulnerability in isolation is only part of the problem. For us, the wider context was, ranking a vulnerability against another risk within the end customer's environment. That could be an exposed secret, or it could be exposed PII or an internet-facing API, all different component parts of risk that we rank together. Vulnerabilities are only part of the problem. There's a couple other questions I haven't got round to answering. Maybe one for you here, Dan. How does Apiiro detect secrets? And the second question was, what SCMs does Apiiro integrate with?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, from an SCM integration point of view, let's take the second one. So Apiiro integrates to Git, usually Git-based solutions, and also to Perforce. So those will be like the common one. It will be Azure DevOps, Bitbucket, GitLab, and GitHub, and also Perforce, which is not necessarily Git-based. Of course, we add more supports to other SCMs as we go. So if there is any other requirement from any of your clients, so we are happy, of course, to take that as well, and we are prioritizing it all the time. As for the secret detection, the way that it's working, so we have our own engine that detect those secrets. As I said in the demo, we distinguish between different types of secrets. So being able to identifying pattern secrets, it's relatively easy. It's because it's mainly based on regular expressions. I will say that anything that requires like a detection of random key secrets or user passwords, so those are more prone to false positive by definition, because just having a password string in my code doesn't necessarily mean this is like a secret, or just having like a UUID string in my environment doesn't necessarily mean it's a secret. So for that, we need to bake in more context. For example, like what's the variable that sits in, where it sits in the code, is it in a configuration? So trying to bake in more context from the code. So generally speaking, that context helps us to reduce significantly the number of false positive and being able to be more accurate. But generally speaking, this is the way that we detect the secrets. We know then to provide those additional layers of classification, like whether it sits in a configuration, source code file, test file, documentation, and then of course being able to build like policies to generate different levels of risk based on that context. I hope that clarifies.
Right. Thanks, Dan. Two other questions, and we'll wrap up. I think there was a question around deployment. The understanding is that Apiiro is a SaaS-based solution. Is it possible to restrict the cloud region for which Apiiro is providing services to a customer? Absolutely, yes. So a couple of things there. We are predominantly a SaaS implementation. We do have some other deployment options. If there is a hard mandate around on-prem, we can address that. But typically, 90+% of our deployments are SaaS. We do offer choice around which cloud provider and which region you're actually Apiiro is hosted in. So if there's a mandate for an EU hosted instance, we can provide that. We can provide different cloud providers as well if there's some stipulation around that. So I hope that answers that question. And the final one, quickly to close out on, Dan, back to you. Does Apiiro generate SBOMs?
Yeah, so definitely. So being able to build that dependency store for any of the repositories and then for applications, so we can actually build an SBOM in the format of a Cyclone DX format. So yeah, usually that covers that requirement.
Great. And actually, sorry, I missed this one. Hey there, Paul Foster. Good to see you online. Just a quick final question from Paul here. Do you have a list of recommended workflows to ensure all common recommended alerts for AppSec practitioners are covered? Great question, Paul.
I think so generally speaking, yes. Of course, we have recipes that any practitioner can go and ingest. Realistically, we have with any of our customers, we have AppSec experts that work with the customers to embed those processes, to understand their priorities, and also to take in consideration the maturity level, right? Like, for example, there is no point in having a workflow that alerts on exposed secrets if you don't have like a key store management or KMS embedded in the organization. Or on the flip side, if you don't have any security champion program, maybe reporting on the APIs in the PR doesn't make sense, but it does make sense to do that scoping for periodic pen tests. So it really depends on the maturity level. Yeah, but we have those, of course, recipes, if you'd like, for the best practices.
Right. Thanks for the question, Paul. Thank you, Dan. Good. I think, Ritesh, I think we probably draw it to a close, can't we? I think. Thank you for hosting this. Really do appreciate it.
No problem. I think we've answered most of the questions on chat as well. Again, refer to the link in the chat in case you want to register as a partner, or we'll anyway send you a follow-up email with our contact details. So if you want to follow up or have further questions, organize a session only for you or your company, we can make that happen. So with that, yes, I will conclude the webinar. Thank you for joining us, all of you. Thanks, Simon, and thanks, Eden, for presenting as well. And until next time, this is Nuaware signing off. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Everyone, good day.